Hey guys, welcome back to the Vintage Watch Guy. If you like the videos, please like and subscribe below and leave your comments. Today I'm going to talk about the brand Breitling. Um, in vintage chronographs, there's a lot of interest. There's for the different big companies, like for example Rolex, Daytona, even though it wasn't very popular at the time, has since become very iconic. And you see the prices for example, Paul Newman Daytonas, and even other later like Zenith El Primero based movement Daytonas even has really skyrocketed. Within the Omega vintage market, Speedmaster, the Moon Watch is iconic. The price for that, far outpaced the vast majority of other Omega vintage watch offerings. But today I'd like to talk about Breitling. Now, Breitling sort of has got a little bit of a bad rap in the modern period. They were really got into the big shiny watch trend that was popular, which is sort of reached or reaching the end of its popularity now. And so some people consider them too big, too shiny. But I think the new CEO, George Kern, who was formerly at IWC, he's really brought his aesthetic and his vibe to Breitling. And you can see now the new lines, for example, the Premier, which they relaunched. This is an old original Premier, actually. The Premier line and some of the other lines. The new quote-unquote Navitimer, a little bit controversial because of lack of the slide rule, but the new Breitling seems to be moving in a little bit different direction since they're required by CVC. Prior to that, they were one of the few independent companies other than Patek and Audemars Piguet. So in terms of the history of Breitling, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but just in general, Breitling in the vintage area, I think is mostly known for chronographs. When you think about the history of chronographs, you really think about two companies. One is Longines, which made an in-house caliber, the Flyback, 30CH, 13ZN, I believe they're called. Those are really iconic, beautiful chronographs. But in terms of the development of the chronograph, Breitling is, I would say, as important as Longines in many respects. They didn't make their own movements. Today's fascination with in-house manufacturing, having the movement made totally in-house, that's sort of a modern thing. Back then, especially for a complication like chronograph, which requires a lot of expertise to make, people turn to known suppliers such as Valjoux, Venus. For the less expensive pieces, Landeron was a big supplier, Lemania. Even companies like Patek, for example, used the Lemania movement, which is based on what within Omega later became the caliber 321. I think some of the lag in vintage Breitling may be due to the fact that they didn't use the same movement as some other companies. For the lag, say, compared to a company like Hoyer, which I think in terms of chronographs has is sort of similar along the same time period. But, but Breitling, they don't, for example, they use a lot of Venus movements. And I think there's some sort of like halo that comes from, for example, the Daytona and the Valjoux movements that were used in those originally. And, they don't have the Valjoux movement, they have the Venus movement, which in my opinion is a wonderful movement. I honestly don't notice a lot of difference between the two movements. They're both column wheel based movements, but, it doesn't have that Valjoux, oh, it's the same as in the Daytona, for example. Or when you talk about the 321 movement in Omega, you say, oh, well, Patek used the same movement and the movement went to the moon. So when you think 321, okay, it gets a price premium. But Breitling, they use mostly, or the ones I've seen have used a lot of Venus movements. So it's not as, doesn't have that like glow that comes from being associated with another brand. For example, certain Navitimers, I believe, are Valjoux based. You can tell that by the orientation of the pushers and the crown. They're not completely aligned. So those are actually worth more. I'm not sure if those are the same ones as the ones that have the all black, black subdial, black dial ones, but I know those ones are worth more as well. But getting back to Breitling, got off on a tangent there. Breitling, really is an important company in terms of chronograph development. It was founded in 1884. They specialized in chronographs and precision timing from the beginning. It was founded by Leon Breitling. His son Gaston was actually the first person to invent an independent chronograph push piece at 2 o'clock. So this pusher. Before that, chronographs were activated with a mono pusher that went through the crown. So there'd be like a little button on the outside of the crown, and you would depress that button to start the chronograph and depress it again to stop the chronograph, and depress it again to reset the chronograph. I think it was you stop and reset the chronograph at the same time. Correct me if I'm wrong. Please comment below. But he was the first one who invented a separate pusher, so it became, in a way, more obvious that it was a chronograph. Besides whatever's on the dial, you see there's like a button here. It gives it sort of a distinctive look, and made the mechanism a little bit more robust and potentially resistant to dust and water because you weren't utilizing the crown to also fit the chronograph activation mechanism. In 1923, they had another innovation. I mean, we're talking about very basic innovations within chronograph manufacturing. These are like sort of the building blocks of modern day chronographs. They then, in 1923, separated the start-stop function from the zero resetting function. So as I was saying before, you depress the pusher once, you start it, depress it again, stop it, I think reset at the same time, or possibly there's a third push for the reset. I'm not totally sure. I have seen some that where you need to, for example, the Omega Chronostop, when you press it once, which is also, I believe, is a mono pusher. You press it once, you start it, you press it again, it stops it, and then you let go, and it flies back to zero. I'm not sure if all the old chronographs were like that. I haven't seen very many of these early mono pushers. But he separated it. So one button started the chronograph, stopped the chronograph, started the chronograph, stopped the chronograph, and the other button in the crown reset it to zero. So there were two separate functions. So you wouldn't get confused. Did I start it? Did I stop it? Where am I in the buttons? Maybe I'm in a hurry, or I'm timing a car race, I'm excited, I press the wrong button and then the timing gets thrown off. Well, there's a separate button to reset now. I think at that time it was like the chronostop. You started it, stopped it, and reset at the same time. So that innovation, also having a separate back to zero function, I don't want to call it a flyback because I don't want to confuse it with flyback chronographs, but a separate reset to zero function allows you to time successive events. So, this one took 5 seconds. I stopped it. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, 10 more seconds. Stop it. And then I reset when I need to, which at that time was in the crown. Breitling also was the one who really created the modern chronograph in 1934 by having a separate second pusher down here, so that one stopped and started the chronograph and could start and stop it again, and another one would send it back to zero. If you look at some of the other chronographs of that period, for example, Landron, which was one of the cam-based movements that became popular, I think sort of like in the late 50s into the 60s, were used a lot, for example, chronograph Suisse watches, because cam-based watches are easier to manufacture than column wheel watches and were less expensive. That one, I believe you start with the top pusher, stop with the bottom pusher, and then reset it with the bottom pusher. So it's a little bit different orientation. And then, for example, the Movado, the M95, I believe the M91 is the same way. That one you actually start and stop from the bottom. And I started at the bottom. I know it definitely starts on the bottom. I don't remember whether it started on the bottom, stop at the top, and then reset it on the bottom, or whether, whatever it is. But basically you start the chronograph from the bottom. So it's not the same as a Breitling. That may have been related to the patent, or maybe they just wanted to distinguish themselves in some way. But almost all modern chronographs are oriented the way that Breitling invented. And it's actually very disorienting if you pick up an old Landeron. If you've never seen one before, it's very confusing when the bottom button starts the chronograph. I think we instinctively go to this, Breitling-based system that Breitling innovated and invented. So these two watches, have these both, and I enjoy looking at them because to me they sort of tell a story. When you look at serial numbers, Breitling, there's a serial number database, goes back to about 1944, I believe. Watches before that were not listed, at least the online database that I saw. And unfortunately, also for the vintage market for Breitling didn't keep very good records. So it's not like Longines, which has like literally every serial number since the company was founded locked up in a vault somewhere. And if you send to them, they can track down for free the serial number of your movement on your watch and tell you, what country it was sold in, where, some details, what year it was manufactured. That's really a wonderful asset, but Breitling didn't maintain those kind of detailed records, which is a shame for the vintage market. But this watch, actually, this was my first vintage watch. I was interested in vintage, but I wasn't quite ready to take the dive. I was very worried. I heard there was a lot of fakes, a lot of redials. I didn't really understand what a redial was at that time. There could be problems, So I was sort of leery about it, but I happened, two people I should mention. One is Ron at Palisade Jewelers. He's the one who sold me this watch, and he sold me a really nice piece for my first vintage watch. He's in Englewood. He's a great watch dealer. I've bought many vintage pieces from him. He sells some also modern pre-owned, and he's just a great guy. I enjoy interacting with him and visiting his store. And I just want to give him a shout out. The other person that helped me with this watch and get me get into vintage actually is Fred Mendelbaum. He's had been in the news a lot recently in this past year because he's the greatest Breitling collector in the world, or I would say he's the greatest Breitling collector in the world among the Breitling elites. And he has really collaborated with George Kern. He was responsible for a lot of design of the release on the Navitimer 806 new watch, which very closely follows the old one and follows the design language. Even the number of little beads on the bezel, is exactly the same as the original. And it was, I believe it's an AOPA one too with the wings. Beautiful new modern watch. I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to see one of these watches in person, but I've seen the pictures. It looks wonderful. And, Watchfred was on, I posted the pictures on a website, I believe is, one of those I believe it was Watch You Seek, an online watch forum. And Watchfred was kind enough to comment on the post and, look at the dial and say, yes, I think this is an original Breitling watch. Some of the other commentators were not sure. He pointed out that the bridge wasn't always signed during this period, so that, even though the bridge wasn't signed on this movement, it was still a correct watch as far as he was concerned. And that really gave me the confidence to purchase the watch and then start really getting into vintage. A lot of times when you buy vintage, you can get burned. You may have bought a redial without knowing it, which greatly affects the value, in which case you feel like you've overpaid and, you sort of lose interest in it. I was fortunate that my first watch was so great, or maybe fortunate or unfortunate, I got really interested in it. It's sort of unfortunate for my wallet, but I've had a great time and met some great people. So this watch, when I look at the serial numbers, it was a little bit before the earliest serial number, but that much before. So, I would think that the watch would be based on the serial number be around 1943. So this is in the middle of World War II. World War II is raging all around Switzerland. Switzerland had the benefit of, number one, being a neutral country through which banking transactions could occur for both sides. And number two, being in a mountainous area in the Alps, which has a lot of natural fortifications and is very difficult to invade also had a pretty strong military for the size, and through a combination of deterrence and accommodation, it managed to keep the Nazis at bay during the war and supply actually watches to both sides. And it emerged from the war in a really dominant position in watchmaking because a lot of the other watchmaking companies have been diverted into other areas, have been making timers for bombs and things like that. So Swiss, or some of the areas, for example, Germany, the Glashütte had been bombed, the Longueuil factory has been destroyed. So, a lot of countries have been dealt very severe damage. And Switzerland really came out of the war in a good position to dominate watchmaking in the post-war period. But this is, during the war, there's some interesting things about it. For example, the case, it's not solid stainless steel. You can see some pitting here. You can see the base metal wearing through. So this watch actually has a chrome plating. Now, steel was in short supply during the war, so it actually makes sense that the watch was chrome plated. Steel was being used to make, bombs and tanks and things, and there wasn't a lot of steel to go around. You can see the wear through on the crown over here as well. One thing I like about vintage watches, including this one, it's easier to change the strap because you have these holes in the lugs. To change it, the pushers also help date the watch. If you didn't have the serial number, the pushers, they have this sort of rectangular appearance. That's pretty typical for like 30s into 40s vintage chronographs. The dial also helps to date the watch. You see there's both an outer tachymeter in blue and a telemeter in red on the inside. So that shows you that, that's pretty typical. Also watches around this time period. Also the red and blue, very distinctive red and blue is also characteristic. One thing that you should check for when you see these kind of scales is you should check these subdials where they overlap. If you see, that is an area that often gets smudged when reprinting a dial. And so that's a very good way to tell redial is there's some smudging of the printing where the overlap is on the subdials. The subdials also, one thing I enjoy about this watch also is the subdials oriented at 12 and 6, which is less common and gives the watch to me a more distinctive appearance. The handset I enjoy a lot. It's very beautiful. You can see, let me just activate the watch here. Had someone give some feedback that I was showing watches that weren't running, so I tried to show you some things that are running today, especially as there's chronographs. You can see that the seconds hand has this beautiful deep leaf-shaped detail on the back of it. I really enjoy that. And you can see these, I forget what this is called. It's kind of like almost like a Roman sword kind of shape to the hands as well, which is very distinctive. Resets to 0 smoothly. And the Breitling logo there, the logo is something you want to check for originality as well. You can obviously see smudging or unevenness in the logo when it's been redone by hand or traced over. Another interesting part about this watch is the telephone marks you see on the minute track. Get this out of the way. Look at the hands also. Look at the minute hand. It's got that little mark on it. Actually, that's a really cool design language thing. See the other hands, they're pretty much straight. But the seconds hand, as well as the minute counter hand, have a little extra detail, a little leaf shape there, a little arrow shape there. So with purely the design language, they tell you that, hey, this is the chronograph. I have a little extra detail here, without even having to, look at anything else or look at what exactly, the markings are on the subdial. You can tell just by looking at the hands. The chronograph, they match, which I think is like a really cool detail. It shows that there's a lot of thought put into the design language of the watch. We can see that there's marks at 3, 6, and 9 on the chronograph minute counter, and that was a telephone indicators for telephone calls. So I believe that's when you had to insert a quarter. So it's telling you that the telephone call was getting close to being the next interval at which you had to pay more. I believe it was insert whatever it was at the time, a dime or a nickel. You had to insert more money, or maybe it's long distance, they charge you more. But it's to help you keep track of your phone calls since it was quite expensive at that time. So that's a cool feature about these vintage chronographs. If you see those marks and they're not at 3, 6, and 9, they're at some other interval, 5, 10, 15, that's also often a sign of a redial. Just stop, reset to 0 for you there. Beautiful. You see there's some detail too. You know, there's some, you see the crowns, it's a manual wind, the crown's been worn down some brassing along the pushers too, a little bit. But you just still see some detail of the original finish of the case. You see that the side was brushed, but the bezel was polished and smooth, as was the back. So even during the war, you know, they're still doing some interesting stuff. They're making it interesting. There's, you know, brushed and polished finishes. You know, there's, you know, angles to the lugs. You see the chamfering along the lug there. So even during the war, they're doing they have this like skill that they're still maintaining, even though they're using a chrome case. There's still like this fine finishing and polishing work going on, and the design language also has been preserved. Cool thing about Breitling also is that the marks are actually punched into the case back on the outside, not the inside. So there you can see the serial number. I don't think anybody's faking this, so I'm not going to cover it. I have no more strap. You can see I like those. And then you see the reference number 17, is that an 8? I think it's 178. So that also helps easily identify the watch without having to have the skill to pop the movement open. Vintage watches is sort of advantageous in most instances in older watches to take a look at the movement to see if it's rusty, especially if the watch is not functioning normally. Sometimes the watch seems to be functioning perfectly. I sort of skip it. Maybe that's being lazy, but I don't entirely know enough to know what I'm looking at with those. I can have a general idea, but not always. And if the watch is running smoothly, everything's working properly, usually the movement's at least okay and can be cleaned up if necessary. If it's not running, you have to worry about things like rust or incorrect parts, poorly fitted parts. Sometimes you get an unpleasant surprise. So when I look at this watch, I think, you know, awesome design language especially with the chronograph hands. Beautiful design, tachymeter, telemeter, different colors, pop of color. I really enjoy that. And the chamfering on the lugs. You know, the serial number, the brush polish finishes. It's a really fine watch, but it's chrome plated because they had a steel shortage. So that to me says, you know, hey, we're still doing the best we can, but, you know, we're a little short on materials, but we still have the expertise. Whereas this watch, if you look at the serial number, dates it to 1945. So this is sort of as the war is ending. Europe is in ashes for the most part, even though the Swiss watch industry remains mostly intact. And you see that Breitling is really going all out here. They're not being conservative, like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. They're like, hey, let's make an awesome watch. Oh, sorry, one other detail, going back to this one for a second. You see that the telemeter, or telemeter, not totally sure how to pronounce it, you see how it's in kilometers? So that tells you that the watch was sold in Europe. Because if it was sold in the US or England at that time, it would be in miles rather than kilometers. That's another interesting detail. It tells you a little bit about the history of the watch. So with this one, okay, we're in 1945. Europe is in ashes. The war just ended. America is triumphant. And Breitling, instead of being conservative, they say, okay, let's go all out. You know, they're really going all out here. They have 3 subdials. So there's both a running there's running seconds. There's a minute counter. You see again those telephone marks along the minute counter. So you see the same design language. And you also have additionally an hour counter here. So you have a more complex movement that also counts the hours. This case is in stainless steel. You see the same kind of brushed and polished finishes, brushing on the side. But this is a stainless steel watch. You know, they're not messing around with chrome anymore. They're like, oh, well, we made chrome plated during the war, but you know what? War's over. Back to stainless steel, the best material for a durable watch. And they're really, the other thing about it, look at what they wrote on the back. On this one, okay, we got a serial number and we have the reference number. This one, they're telling you, they're showing off here. Waterproof, shock protected, anti-magnetic, stainless steel watch. Breitling 788, serial number below. Serial number just above that. So they're telling you, listen, we're making a robust watch here. We're not messing around with anymore. The watch is waterproof. I mean, I wouldn't get this watch anywhere near water. It was waterproof when it was made, or at least what they called waterproof. Actually, the term waterproof dates it as an early watch as well. At one point, it became a law that the watches could not be called waterproof anymore. They had to be called water resistant because it's not truly waterproof. It's sort of like a misleading statement to say it's completely waterproof. So later on, watches became called water resistant. There's some Seiko watches that were out during that time period, and you can look at the dial. If it says proof or if it says resist, those are two. That helps you date the watch. But Seiko watches are usually pretty easy to date for different reasons, really the serial number. But that's just a quick thing. You can look at it without having to look anything up. What watch is waterproof? It's an early watch. It's definitely before I think the rule changed in the 1970 or 1971. It's also shock protected. So it has some kind of, I'm assuming, Inca block or some other shock protection system, so that if the watch is hit against something, the balance staff, which is what the balance wheel rotates on, which is constantly rotating very fast with the hairspring and has very fine tips on it. Instead of just breaking off, it has a little shock protector, so it like jiggles around a little bit. So that's shock protected. So this shows you that it has that high tech. Anti-magnetic, suggests there's some iron, maybe an iron cage around it, or maybe the materials they use were less magnetic. For this particular watch, I'm not sure. It wasn't, I don't think, particularly advertised as a stainless steel watch. As an anti-magnetic watch. The other similar watches of that time that were anti-magnetic, maybe a little bit later than this, more in the 50s, like the Milgauss, the Engineer, they typically had a soft iron cage around them. Also the original Railmaster for Omega. And stainless steel, as I said. So, and they also, look at the back. They gave this kind of circular brushing to the back. Let you know, hey, this is stainless steel. This is a quality watch. This is a robust quality, every high-tech thing we can put in there in terms of watches at that time we have. This is like Breitling saying, the war is over. Let the good times roll. We're going to make the best. And that's what I really enjoy about having these two watches is that it really tells you a story. This is like, we're going to hold on to our traditions in the best Swiss way. But we have to use chrome. It hurts us, but we're going to do it. Survive the war. And this one, okay, we're back, baby. Look at us. We got all this. We got the best technology, the best materials. They put radium on the dial. They used, after the 20s, the 20s is when radium, people became more aware that it was a health hazard. So if you, put a Geiger counter on this watch compared to, for example, a trench watch with very thick radium, it'll light up much less. There's much less radiation. There was starting to be some health standards about radium, but this is a radium watch. It does still have a little bit of radioactivity. It has those beautiful syringe hands, so they made them a very tiny tip to show you the excellence of their skill in making them. Beautifully blued steel, and they had a little pocket to put the radium into, or a little blank space in the middle to put the radium into. And I love also the name of the line, Premier, meaning first and the best. So, this is like the reaction after World War II is to put out this Premier line. And interestingly enough, the Premier line, George Kern, has been revived as sort of a dressy chronograph line, and harkens back to some of this design language that they had in the original Premier line. So yeah, that's what I have this week, talking about these two Breitlings, the story they tell about World War II and right after. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Again, this is Vintage Watch Guy, and I will see you in the next one.